everyone, I'm the Blood Guy. Welcome back to another review of a documentary based on a real-life serial killer. And this is yet another one that I have never spoken of, or spoken about, either film or documentary. There are films about this killer that I have not seen. I think there was one from 2017, just called Joel. I've seen the trailer, but I haven't seen the film. I have looked for it. But, yes, this is on Joel Rifkin. Of course, one of New York's most notorious serial killers, killed at least 17 women, I think between 1989 and 1993. Dismembered all of them, scattered them all around New York, some parts of New Jersey. Number of them at his mother's house where he lived, but most of them in his car. That's kind of why I'm dressed up like this. He had a mustache and glasses as well. But I guess this is part of a series because I've already done Dahmer on Dahmer. There's also Kemper on Kemper, which I have not seen. But this is the 2021, I guess, part of that series. Rifkin on Rifkin, the private confessions of a serial killer. I really liked Dahmer on Dahmer. You can check out my review for that. I thought that was a very straightforward, decent documentary for an hour and a half. That's what this one is, hour 27 minutes-ish. Yeah, this one's obviously being like a private conversations type documentary. I think this killer on killer, like Dahmer on Dahmer, Rifkin on Rifkin, I think is sort of like the Oxygen equivalent of Netflix's Conversations with the Killer series. Because originally, those three were on Oxygen, or they're part of Oxygen. You can see Dahmer and Rifkin on Peacock. The Kemper one's not on there. But in any case, yeah, it came out in 2021. It was directed by, I believe, Mark Marabella, who has done a ton of documentary work. A lot of true crime, History Channel, stuff about aliens, but a lot of true crime. Many documentaries that I've done has focused more on the investigation. Rifkin is kind of like Dahmer, where there wasn't a hunt for a serial killer until he was already caught. So there really is no investigation. So this is more of a deep dive into Joel Rifkin and his life. It's sort of built around this recorded interview at Attica when he was in Attica. Now he's in Clinton, which is in Dannemora. But an old college friend of his, and I'm going to butcher this name, Robert Mladinich, if I pronounce that correctly. He was a college friend of Rifkin, who then became a police officer and then a Rifkin biographer. He did write From the Mouth of the Monster. And this whole documentary kind of hinges or is built around that taped interview. So you get a lot of clips of Rifkin. You actually get to hear, I'm just going to call him Robert. You get to hear a lot of Robert's questions, a lot of his input, which kind of makes it more intimate, which I really like. I really do like hearing the interviewers' questions to the killers as well as their answers. It goes into his life. Like most of these documentaries, it starts out with how he got caught, that he jumped backward, worked forward. It has that kind of setup. You don't really get a whole lot of family members from victims because of the 17. I think there's only family members of 3 that make an appearance in this documentary. Of course, almost all of his, actually I think all of his victims were prostitutes. A lot of them weren't even reported missing, so they probably don't have a whole lot of family willing to come forward for a documentary. So there's only like 3 family members. They tell their story of their loved one, how they found out that not only were they killed, but they were killed by Joel Rifkin. Which, by the time this story broke in 93, Rifkin was a big name. So these people were being called, hearing like, yeah, they're one of his. That's how a lot of these people found out. We get those stories. You get some people he went to school with. One was like a childhood neighbor. One woman just goes by Lynn. Uh, she was a classmate. It goes into. I thought it was going to go deeper into the bullying he went through all throughout his school. It does touch on it quite a bit, but a lot of this really just talks about how Joel dealt with things. Like, yes, he was horrifically bullied. It doesn't really go into set uh, of incidents, I guess, like his camera being stolen. It might mention that. I think it mentions him being called Turtle. That was his nickname. Uh, it doesn't really go into specific pranks or whatever, but basically how he built the secret life from bullying. And that's one thing that Mladinich talks about a lot, was how being invisible, starting with the bullying, helped him be so successful. And a lot of the documentary is built because he kind of carries us through the whole documentary. He's the main speaker. Of course, we get a lot of officers that worked the case, the ones that arrested him, interrogated him, some of the officers in areas where the bodies were found, because not a lot of bodies were found until after. Goes into his arrest. The big, like, no, it's not just the one in my truck. There's like 16 others. That story exploding, then his trial, how he got sentenced 203 years. But the thing that makes it the most worth it is there is a lot of audio from that interview. So that really makes it worth it. There's also a lot of crime scene photos, like of his truck when he first wrecked and got arrested. Plenty of photos of like his bedroom and stuff they found, including the serial killer, not paraphernalia, but like a Green River book, articles on Shawcross. It's a fairly deep dive into Joel Rifkin's life. I don't really like to say mind, because I don't think we can ever really understand a killer's mind. But it kind of does try to come up with theories. You know, like him liking being invisible, or if going after prostitutes was lashing out. It goes over quite a bit. And it was kind of refreshing to get a documentary that is more about the killer than the investigation. I do find the investigation ones very interesting, but I also really do like the ones that are about the killer themselves. So I liked The Pig Farm, which was more about the investigation into Picton. I really liked Netflix's Night Stalker, which was barely about Ramirez, but about the investigation. Times Square Killer, I thought was good on Netflix. Joe Berlinger, about a Richard Cottingham, but more about the investigation. I do like all those, but I like these about the killer, their life and crimes more. I don't have a whole lot on Rifkin. Of course, I have this book. I got the one by Jack Rosewood and Rebecca Lowe, Joel the Ripper, and probably the next biggest one by Maria Timiades, if I pronounce that correctly, Garden of Graves. There is a woman, her last name's Swirsky. It kind of makes me think of SNL, but it said she was a biographer as well, so I'm assuming she has a book out that I would like to pick up. So there is a lot of information in this. It's definitely worth checking out. The hour and a half goes by very quickly. It does spend a lot of time in his childhood. It doesn't really go into specific murders. I think it only picks out 3 or 4, maybe 5 specific ones that it talks about. It kind of skips and jumps around a bit. But it does spend a lot of time on his life. Even talks about his family a bit, his father, his mother. So that's very interesting. And I know some people have complained about the amount of audio, from the tapes series. This one's loaded with clips from that interview, so it's definitely worth checking out. I would say it is one of the better ones I've seen recently, especially of ones that focus more on the killer than the investigation. Again, there was no investigation till after he was caught, but I would say this one was as good as Dahmer on Dahmer, just comparing it within the series. So I definitely recommend it. Uh, you can see it on Peacock or Oxygen if you have that. Dahmer on Dahmer's on a few different streaming services. Kemper on Kemper is not on Peacock for some reason, but that's the third one for me to check out if I find it. But yeah, I thought this was really good. Uh, I like the testimonials from uh, victims' family members, the people that knew Rifkin. I thought this Robert Mladinich guy worked. He's not really the host. Again, he's really just the main speaker, but I thought he did a good job. And it's definitely loaded with plenty of audio clips to really make it worth it. And just that extra touch that I like, that you can hear the interviewer's questions, which I think adds more to the experience of hearing the answers. So yeah, I thought it was very well made. I really enjoyed it. Uh, a lot of the stuff I already knew because of podcasts and books, but it was nice to get different perspectives, like neighbors and friends and stuff like that. So good documentary. I highly recommend it. So now we'll get into the short summary and then, of course, the long part, the list of everything it covers. I am trying to cut down on that, make that portion shorter. I'm going to have to because my next documentary I'm watching is 6 parts. It's a John Wayne Gacy one, 6 parts. So I really got to limit what I take notes on. So get into the long half of the video and go into what it covers.
Joel Rifkin is one of New York's most notorious and prolific serial killers, killing at least 17 women between 1989 and 1993. Most, if not all, were prostitutes. Rifkin at first brought these women to his childhood home, where he lived with his mother, then dismember and dispose of them in various areas of New York and New Jersey. After the first few, he'd strangle them in his car and then bring them home to dismember for disposal. Most of his victims were not even reported missing. He was arrested on July 28, 1993, when he was to be pulled over for a license plate violation and led the cops on a chase, then striking a pole. The officers then found the body of his final victim, Tiffany Bresciani, in his truck. He then confessed to the 17 murders. Rifkin has gone on to say that constant bullying during his school years and the disapproval of his father led to his, quote, secret life, where he was always fantasizing about his violent urges. He has also said that the Hitchcock film Frenzy inspired him. In 1994, he was sentenced to 203 years in prison for the 9 counts of murder he was tried for. He served time in Attica and is now in Clinton County Correctional Facility in New York.
And so we'll go into what the documentary actually covers. And this might be kind of lengthy because this is one of the more fascinating ones that I've seen lately. So it opens up with photos and footage of his arrest and audio of that and text saying Rifkin talked to his friend in Attica, how an ordinary man used his anonymity for evil, people talking about him, never before heard interviews inside the mind of a killer. Your typical kind of intro to this kind of documentary. So it opens up New York City, 1989. Talks about the rise in crime rate in the 80s and 90s, almost 2,000 murders a year, the crack epidemic, news footage and audio of the rise of murder and crack. And then we get text. Every once in a while, text will come up on the screen saying, but just east of New York City seemed like a safe haven until the night of June 27th, 1993, which then and every time we go to a different place, it'll say sort of like a little tag up at the top. Southern State Parkway, New York City. A retired detective for New York State Police, Sean Ruan, if I pronounced that correctly, talks about a traffic pullover at 3:15 a.m. It was a pickup truck, no license plate, refused to pull over. They thought he was intoxicated, led them on a chase. finally struck a light pole after they cuffed him and put him out in the car. They noticed the smell. They went to the bed of the truck. There was a blue tarp, and when they looked under the tarp, there was a dead, naked female who had been dead for several days at that point. And this is all told through dramatizations. Some of it is pretty dramatization heavy, but it's like that kind where it's extreme close up. It's not like watching a movie. So these kind of dramatizations I don't mind. And as I've said before, the guy that they got to play Rifkin in these dramatizations at least looked pretty spot on. Eugene Corcoran, wow, excuse me, who's the retired lieutenant of New York State Police, says that was the first time Rifkin had ever come to anyone's attention. He had been completely invisible, and how he had supervised that investigation. It shows photos of his wrecked truck, of as it was, and of Rifkin being arrested. They go into his interrogation. Has it ever happened before? How many? And his reply is 1 or 100. What's the difference? So then, retired detective and author Robert Mladinich. I probably butchered that name. I don't even think they said it throughout the documentary, so I don't know if it's right. He's not really our host, but he's kind of the main talking head. He's the one that kind of carries us through the entire documentary. He talks about hearing about the arrest on the radio and realizing it was his college friend, Joel Rifkin. It has a audio news clip of Rifkin and photos of him in college. So then we jump back to State University of New York at Brockport, 1979. He talks of the both of them being students of journalism, Rifkin being talented at photography, seeming cool, and liking him. It shows a clip of a fight that the officer wrote about and that Rifkin took photos of. It shows his photos of that fight. Finding out next semester that Joel dropped out, his reaction to the arrest, wanting to know more, so he wrote Rifkin of Attica Prison, which was the first one that he was sent to. He's now at Clinton Correctional Facility of Dannemora, which was also the first prison where David Berkowitz was held. And yes, of course, the big riot that's mentioned in Dog Day Afternoon. Joel remembered him, and 7 years later, he went to go visit him. We get text on the screen. This private conversation between the two friends has been hidden away, ... until now. So from here on, every once in a while, we'll get a clip of the Rifkin tape. So I'm just going to say Rifkin tape. We hear their greeting, Mladinich asking him what he would have thought 20 years ago if someone told him he'd be there and why. Joel responds, I think the guy was crazy. He asks him if he ever looks back and wonders what went wrong. He says he has a lot of time for introspection. When they went to that fight in 79, if he fantasized about his crimes then, and he said, quote, everyone has a fantasy life, positive or negative. Any I had, I never thought I'd act on them. Mladinich then goes into how Rifkin was so disarmingly friendly, honest, candid. What drove someone I considered a friend to murder, and how could he get away with it for so long? He also talks about how when Joel talked about his childhood, he's not emotional. He mentions no bedwetting, animal torture, or fire starting, which makes him very unique. Talks about how in his studies and dealing with serial killers, those are all common things. Mentions how Joel talked about being adopted, which we get a clip from the Rifkin tape. Do you have any memories of when you felt like you belonged, felt good about yourself? He says, yeah, as a kid, I remember back to 4 or 5, I was more confident back then. Then we moved to the suburbs. He goes into how, this is back to Mladinich, how they settled into East Meadow, Long Island, which it shows photos of him as a baby, some family photos. We're introduced to Fred Ryder, if I pronounce that correctly. former neighbor and classmate on East Meadow being nice, a middle class place to grow up. He used to walk to school with Joel. Then there's a woman named Lynn. There's no last name. It just says former classmate, so just Lynn. Uh, on Joel being extra quiet, polite, nice, and in his own world at all times. Uh, then they both go into Joel's inferiorities. Coming out at that time, not good at sports, being called the Turtle. Turtle was his nickname in school because he was kind of slow. The strain that caused his college athlete father. Get another tape clip of Joel talking about his lack of sports skills and his father. It goes into the frustration that this caused him, never feeling good about himself. It shows more photos of him throughout school. It goes into, despite having an IQ of 128, he was a poor student, while his father was more of the scholar. Another tape clip of that as well, and feeling like he's a constant disappointment. So they're introduced to N.G. Barrell, a PhD forensic psychologist. He was actually, I believe, the court-appointed expert witness during Joel's trial. He talked about being the first to interview Rifkin in prison and how he was, quote, tortured by not living up to his father's expectations, how he gravitated to his mother's hobbies like photography and horticulture. Clip of the Rifkin tape on his relationship with his mother, how they got along. Then it goes into the bullying that he endured his whole life, and I figured there would be a good portion of this dedicated to just the school bullying, because he had a lot of it. I don't think it really goes into specific times, like his camera being stolen or anything like that. But it goes into how he took it and the effect that would have on his psyche. Clip of the Rifkin tape on the bullying, but also about being cunning and sneaky to hide around the bullying, which he called his secret life, and then that being compared to his crimes. Like he would learn the schedules of his bullies, take a different route to get home, be able to get dropped off while everyone else is in class. So he called this his secret life. More about the psychological effects of just taking the bullying, not doing anything about it, not fighting back, being invisible, and the only people who notice him are the bullies. So him trying to stay invisible. How when he hit puberty, he had psychosexual fantasies and saw Hitchcock's Frenzy. I figured it would talk about Frenzy at some point. I think this is the only mentioning of Frenzy, but I do know that was quite an obsession for him. Being aroused by a scene where a woman is strangled with a necktie, clip of the Rifkin tape, how these thoughts of bondage, rape, strangulation was an all-encompassing obsession for him. Then we're introduced to Joan Swirsky, who's a Rifkin biographer, but also a psychotherapist, rather, on how his fantasy shaped his future. Another clip of the tape on how he wanted sexual experience before college, so he bought a prostitute. He says how much easier it was than dating, no fear of rejection, no family to get to know, and it became an 18-year secret life and obsession. So we get more text on the screen. It says, with failing grades, Rifkin drops out of college and moves back home with his parents. In 1986, his father is hospitalized with cancer. So we get another clip of the tape. He talks about his father's cancer. Then it goes into how in his late 20s, his father offered to send him back to school. He took biology and botany, opened up his own landscaping business. Another clip of the tape about visiting his father, who hugged his mother and his sister, but not him, so he still felt like a disappointment. So then when Joel got the 2 A's that his father wanted from him, because that was one of the stipulations of paying for his school, he raced to the hospital to tell him, but he had died, so he never got to see his father be proud of him. So we get another clip of the tape on how his father took a handful of barbiturates one night, induced coma, then death. It goes into how with his father gone and his mother preoccupied, he had freedom to roam the night. So another clip of the tape. Spending a whole week's pay in a weekend on prostitutes. He talks about their prices. Then it goes into the addiction to prostitutes, how he could be in control with them, project all of his anger that he had, things he didn't like about himself, his father's disapproval, the bullying, being rejected by women in general, onto them. Then how they kept him from having a good relationship or job. Another clip of the tape, uh, how he had been with 300 to 350 prostitutes, and after a while, even fantasy games felt normal to him, like they weren't perks as he called them. How in 1989 he made his murderous fantasies a reality. So a clip from the tape, being asked if he knew when he went out that night if it would be the night. He replied by saying he didn't know it was going to happen. It was just a regular night, just a little more intense than usual. So then it says, up at the top, March 1989. He picks up a sex worker named Susie. We won't know who it is till later, but that is Heidi Balch, who was 25 at the time, whom he'd been with before. She agrees to go to his home in Long Island. His mother was away. They have sex on the couch, fall asleep. When he wakes up, she wants more drugs, which she had done that the whole night before as well. This enrages him, so he picks up a howitzer shell and beats her with it. So clip from the tape talking about hitting her 20 to 30 times with the howitzer shell that he bought from a flea market, and how when she started to move, he panicked and he strangled her. How after he'd feel pleasure about it, sometimes anxious. So then Mladinich on how, as a cop, you can tell when people are relishing when they recount their crimes, but Rifkin was so disconnected when he did it. So another clip of the tape. Then proceeds to tell how he took her to the basement to dismember her with an X-Acto knife. Yeah, a little arts and crafts X-Acto knife. You can hear Mladinich ask, you can cut a head off with an X-Acto knife, and he replies with, works just like a scalpel. He asks if he was bothered by it. He says no. He looked at it as something that needed to be done. So then it goes into how he disposed of some parts in one of the Manhattan rivers and the head on a New Jersey golf course, which then we go over to that area of Hopewell Township, New Jersey, March 5th, 89. Bruce Carnall, who's a retired lieutenant of the Hopewell PD, and Bill Springer, who's the acting police chief in Hopewell. They talk about how the head of Susie was found by a golfer, shows crime scene photos. All but 4 teeth were missing. A jawbone was gone. And it doesn't mention, but I believe her fingertips was also gone. How Joel had heard a news report and panicked. So we get a clip of the tape saying how he was panicked for months after. And he's asked if he wanted to do it again. If he wouldn't do it again out of guilt or fear of being caught. And he says he just didn't want to do it again. So about a month later, the legs were found in a creek 74 miles away in Morris County, New Jersey. Dr. Barrow goes into the godlike feeling that killers have. Whether you take a life or save a life, it's in your hands, so it's like a god complex. Clip of the Rifkin tape. Still too panicked to do it again. He fantasized about it with a few girls, but let them go. Nothing happened. She was never identified until his confession, which that's actually not true. I believe it said that, but then later on in the documentary, it talks about how that Bill Springer guy found her, found out who she was. But his efforts to conceal her ID worked. How he took this as a success, fantasy to reality, and getting away with it. Clip from the tape. Asked when the next victim was. He says about 18 months later. Asked if he fought the urge. He says it was like the resolution of, okay, but this is the last time. So Mladinich explains in the fall of 1990 his second victim, which he doesn't say, but it was Julie Blackburn. A sex worker picked up, taken home, sex in his childhood bed. She offers more sex for drugs. He has no money, So she complains, so he bludgeons her with a table leg. But went out and bought cement and tarps, so we get another clip from the tape. How he dismembered her, placed parts in the cement, but, quote, realized that the shit has to dry, so he hung out with it for 2 days. During these tapes, when he refers to the victim, he always says it. He always refers to the victims as it. Goes into how the cement blocks were dumped in the river, never to be found. He accelerates 1 to 1.5 months. He kills 4 more women. Clip from the Rifkin tape says how they usually occurred around holidays or personal celebration days. In that period was Thanksgiving to New Year's. Tried to resist, but would go out, and if it happens, it happens. It goes into how there was a reconstruction of Susie's head, trying to find out who she is, with footage of it being made and how it was used for leads but went nowhere. It shows what it looks like now. Milanish goes into how 1991 Joel killed his first victim outside of his home, which was at a motel in Long Island, and then the next few were in his car. Mentions his ability to stay invisible and appear not dangerous and getting better at killing. We get a clip of the tape. He's asked if it becomes like second nature, where you don't get nervous. He says, kind of, quote, the more you practice something, the more proficient you get at it. So then it goes into victim number 6, which was killed in his car, then driven to the industrial area in northern Manhattan, dumps her body by the water, but when he walks back to his car or his truck, the cops are there. And immediately he picks up a discarded auto part, says he's not stealing, just scavenging, and he gets away with a warning. Cops believe him. Mentions his cool nature and ability to talk his way out of things, and that victim 6 has still never been identified, even to this day. And I believe she's still the only Jane Doe out of his 17 victims. Mladich says how this incident made him more confident in not getting caught, but also appreciating his ability and success in not being noticed, and what it takes to stay that way. So then it goes into his victim profile, how his victim profile helped keep him invisible, which was sex workers, how their profession, their addiction, and desperation makes it vulnerable, and the view of them by law enforcement and the public, allows him to stay successful as well. Few of his victims not even being reported missing, but his 7th victim, Lorraine Orvieto, was. So we're introduced to Darlene Orvieto, who's the cousin. She talks about Lorraine, who was 28 when she went missing, her family's efforts to find her, Lorraine as a person and how she developed HIV, which led to AIDS from a botched transfusion, which led to drugs and shady people, shady choices, which is all put to photos of her and Darlene. How Joel solicited her in Bay Shore, Long Island. We get a clip of the tape. Skipping an annual Christmas gathering to go out, picked her up, took her to the schoolyard, strangled her during sex, which I believe it was oral sex because I think he had a habit of doing that. There was at least a few that he strangled during oral sex. How she's the first of several to be placed in... how she was the first to be placed in a 50-gallon drum and dumped in a canal, which was discovered 7 months later. Goes into Joel becoming more confident and sloppier. Goes into him picking up Iris Sanchez during the day, strangles during sex, and dumps her near Kennedy Airport under a mattress. Another clip from the Rifkin tape. His cruising, crossing into his days. So then Swirsky on Joel hating these women as they represented what he hated about himself, but also formed micro relationships with them due to them being nice to him, which was out of response to being socially unsuccessful. Another clip from the tape. Having seen maybe 6 girls more than once, sometimes how people form crushes on people they see multiple times, and one being Catherine Williams, and it shows a photo of her. So then it goes into Catherine Williams' backstory a bit, like Charlotte, North Carolina, 1979. Uh, Basically, how she met her husband is what that portion is. How she got into partying and cocaine. Uh, I think like she moved away, was supposed to or go get work. Uh, they separated so she could get better from drugs. And she called to say that she's coming back for him, but never showed up. Clip in the Rifkin tape, how he had been with her several times. Swirsky on her being the homecoming queen and a cheerleader, and representing everything he hated and was envious of. The type of girl to reject him and go out with the bullies, having dreams and ambitions, and how she talked about her husband and was sending for him might have set him off. She was his 13th victim. So we're introduced to Fred Klein, who's the retired prosecutor of Nassau County. He talks about Rifkin's cleverness and where he picked them up and dumped them, dumping them in 8 or 9 different jurisdictions, even parts of the same victim. So then it goes into Leah Evans' murder, showing how brazen he'd become. Shows a photo of her. Her friend Elizabeth Swanson we're introduced to. Talks about her being sweet, a student at Sarah Lawrence, then how she became a drug addict. We get text on the screen. Leah drops out when she meets an older man. They have 2 children. Then she disappears. So then Swanson talks about them being 23 and her being asked to be godmother to her kids, Leah's kids, and then she disappears. Shows photos of them. Goes into her becoming homeless due to drugs, and then she's never seen again. Clip of the Rifkin tape. He tells where he picked her up, where he took her, which was a parking lot. She started complaining and crying, so he strangled her in the car. And then taking her to the woods to bury her in a shallow grave. Her being the only one that he buried. And how, quote, due to the rigor or something, her hand came up. And it goes into that's how she was found. I think it was a couple of kids were out in the woods and her hand was sticking out of the ground. She was the first victim to be identified. Clip of the Rifkin tape. That being the only victim that he knows of to hit the papers, but not getting nervous about it. So then text. Only a month later, Rifkin commits the most brazen murder yet. So a clip of the tape about picking a woman up in Forsyth in his mother's car during the day. They begin having sex, and a van pulls up. A guy gets out. He watches the guy kind of walk away, and then he strangles her right then. And then when he looks up, he sees the guy practicing Tai Chi just 3 feet away from the car. So he puts newspapers over her, driving to Kmart to put her in the trunk, then back to his mother's house. And then Klein, the prosecutor, further detailing this story, because that was all told by Rifkin, says how his mother yelled at him when he brought the car back because she had to go out shopping. Mladich then explains how when she came back, unbeknownst to the body of the trunk, Joel moves her to the garage where it stayed for a couple days in the June heat, which shows a photo of the garage, how he did work on his truck that weekend with her still in the garage, and then finally attempted to dispose of her Sunday night into Monday. And then while driving to get rid of the body, that's when the cops tried to pull him over, led on the chase that was talked about in the beginning of the documentary, and it was just over a license plate. And before that, he wasn't on anyone's radar. One mistake of not pulling over blew it wide open. Shows photos of the truck again. Clip of the Rifkin tape. Asked if the circumstances were an attempt to get caught and stop the madness. He says it was pure accident, total lack of sleep. Sean Ruan, the arresting officer, on listening to the interview, and other officers say that they know that he's done it before, and wondering how many, and how he asked for a pen and paper and wrote down all 17 in uh, reverse chronological order. And then he says how crazy it was to go from a traffic stop to a dead body to how many we have 17. So then it goes into having to prove all these confessions, how he detailed all the crime scenes perfectly, even teetering on the line of bragging, which Swirsky on how he'd been bullied his whole life, now he's able to brag. Footage of the recovery at the Kennedy airport, the one that was left under the mattress, and of his home, photos of his bedroom, the jewelry that they found. Sean Ruan and Klein and Eugene Corcoran on the search of his bedroom and finding IDs, jewelry, and matching them to the victims. How he had articles of Arthur Shawcross, the Genesee River Killer. He had a book on the Green River Killer, which of course at that time Gary Ridgway had not been caught, so it was. I believe the book was The Search for the Green River Killer. So that was back before he was caught. So we get a clip of the Rifkin tape. How he had sometimes copied them. He even says he buried one, I buried one. He went water to land, I went water to land. He placed one by an airport, I placed one by an airport. He did things in clusters, I did things in clusters. I think he's talking about both at the same time, because in all of that there's Ridgway and Shawcross. But then he's asked about souvenirs, and he says, that was from the Green River book. I imitated what I read. Shows a photo of Mrs. Rifkin as it goes into how his family was affected by his arrest and how she refused to talk to of any kind of media. She still loved Joel. Talks about how 8,000 pieces of evidence was collected. Excuse me. More footage of the search of his home and various crime scenes. News footage of the Rifkin story. Swanson on finding out through the news that he killed her friend Leah Evans. Darlene Orvieto on the news coverage and learning that he had Lorraine's ID. And Julian Attaway on reading the story, then getting the call saying that Catherine's credit cards was at his home. The final victim, when he got pulled over, was ID'd from a set of beads that she wore, which was found in Joel's room from a witness who saw her wear them. She was ID'd as Tiffany Bresciani. He did not know her. Goes into her a little bit. 23, educated. Came from Louisiana to New York to be an actress. Fell into drugs and sex work. Shows photos of her. April 1994, trial in Nassau County begins. 14 victims found and ID'd, except for the first and, of course, the sixth. Footage of the trial, which shows footage of Fred Klein, the prosecutor, as he also explains that they only presented evidence in the Bresciani case first. How Rifkin's insanity defense, despite being caught with her body and confessing, shows footage of him during the trial. The pressure he had of Rifkin being found insane, and how he's the most prolific serial killer in New York history. Clip of the tape. Asked if he thought he was insane during the crimes, he replies, by legal definition, yes he was. How he felt relief when he was caught and slept the first few days in lockup. So then it goes into the evidence that convinced the jury was that he took the money back from them after he killed them, showing that he knew what he was doing and not insane. He was sentenced 28 to life in that case, but then we get text saying, after his first conviction, Joel Rifkin pleads guilty to 9 other murders. His sentence is extended to 203 years to life in prison. So we get another clip of the tape, asks what he thinks now, serving his 200 years, and if he wanted to be normal. He responds with, "Yeah, I wanted to be normal with the picket fence and dog and kids." He's asked if there was a huge breakout and a good chance of getting away, would he? He says, "No, I'd close my door. I couldn't function in the real world then. I can't now. I function better in prison." So we go to Hopewell, New Jersey, 2013. And there it pretty much just talks about how Bruce Carnall tried to identify Susie, that he retired in 2005. Bill Springer, he became lieutenant in 2012, that he took over trying to identify Susie, and eventually he identified her as Heidi Balch, so it shows a photo of her, and how he solved the case 24 years to the day. So we get text. While some have found closure, Joe Rifkin's murder spree still haunts many in his community. His classmates comment on how normal he was and looked, and how could this happen? Evil is out there. The family members talk about the loss and the lives that they had ahead of them and how they're taken too soon. Mladich, on one thing to take away from a Joel Rifkin is that childhood trauma should be looked at and taken seriously. He was made invisible and picked on, and that invisibility made him a successful serial killer, and that was his way of lashing out. Also, how Rifkin never claimed to be angry at women or prostitutes in general, but at himself and his addiction. Had he got help with dealing with the bullying and his urges, maybe it could have been helped. So then we get a clip from the tape. Asked if he ever encountered his victims again, when he asked for forgiveness, he says, "I don't know. If I didn't kill them, they were going to die anyway. They had destroyed themselves with their lifestyle, and how at the time it was like stepping on a bug or a cockroach." And then asks if he still wants to kill, and he compares it to an alcoholic in recovery. Put a beer in their hands, they'll relapse. So where he is now is the best place for him. And that is Rifkin on Rifkin. And while it's not the deepest dive into a serial killer, like I've heard podcasts that gets a little more specific, but this was a really good Joe Rifkin documentary, and I would probably say this is the best serial killer documentary I've seen recently. Like I said, I think this is Oxygen's equivalent of like Netflix's Conversation with the Killer series, because Dahmer on Dahmer was a lot like this, and that one was really good. I still have not seen Kemper on Kemper, but it's definitely worth it for all the footage, all the interviews that they have, all the audio clips that we get of Rifkin himself. I like the fact that they have Mladich as sort of the host, the guy that carries us through the whole documentary. So yeah, is not as deep as, say, a multi-part series, which is obvious, but just focusing on Joe Rifkin, I would say this is a very good documentary and definitely worth checking out. Yeah, I would say this is one of the better ones that I've watched recently. It is nice once in a while to not get one that's just completely the investigation and only getting the killer at the end. I mean, this one is all about Rifkin. So yeah, I really enjoyed this documentary. I wish I could find a way to watch the Kemper one, because then I would have seen Dahmer, Rifkin, and Kemper, and I'm sure that one's just as good as the other two. But yeah, if you're interested in the Joel Rifkin story, this is definitely a documentary to check out. I really enjoyed it. I'm not sure what I'll be doing next, but that's Rifkin on Rifkin, and thank you for watching.